So I'm delighted to introduce our panel this morning, and in alphabetical order. David Small is the recipient of the Caldecott Medal, a Christopher Medal, and the E.B. White Award for his picture books, which include The Gardener with Sarah Stewart, So You Want to Be President, George Washington's Cows, Ruby May Has Something to Say, Fenwick's Suit, Paper John, Hoover's Bride, and Stitches, a 2009 National Book Award nominee and finalist for the Will Eisner Comic Industry Award, among many other books and awards and accomplishments. His drawings have appeared in The New Yorker and The New York Times. Sarah Stewart's books have all been illustrated by David Small, which is really a coincidence to me. You two have met before, right, face-to-face? Or am I wrong about that? Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we could bring you together today. All our books have been illustrated by David Small and include The Money Tree, The Library, The Gardener, which is a Caldecott Honor book, The Journey, and The Friend. She has reviewed children's books for the New York Times and occasionally has a poem published in an obscure journal. You're among family here, just so you know, Sarah. Susan Marie Swanson's picture books include The First Thing My Mama Told Me, a New York Times Best Illustrated book, and The House in the Night, a winner of the Minnesota Book Award and the 2009 Caldecott Medal. Her honors include fellowships in poetry from the Bush Foundation and the McKnight Foundation, as well as the Loft McKnight Artist Fellowship in Children's Literature. She was also the 2012 mentor for the Loft Shabo Award for Picture Book Writers. So please join me in welcoming David, Sarah, and Susan Marie.
I'm not sure how we really arrived at this format this morning, but or even whether it's really a good idea or not. But we talked about when we talked about doing this together. Sarah suggested that we interview one another about our separate work, and I agreed that it sounded like an interesting approach. There is, after all, nothing quid pro quo about couples after, in our case, 28 years of marriage, or even 56 years of marriage, knowing everything there is to know about one another. And that's part of the wonder and the mystery, yes? And in our case, the fact is that our work together is not done together. I know a lot of people have this image of us sitting at the same table, and Sarah writing some words and passing them over to me, and my saying, "Oh, that's wonderful! I can just see that so well." And little bunny rabbits hopping around our ankles as we share our art. Well, it's not like that at all. We have two houses on our property. One is the house we live in. Upstairs on the third floor, Sarah has her workspace, and that's where she does her work. And I, in the other house, have my studio, and that's where I do my work. And we have, over the years, come to the conclusion that the traditional way of illustrators and authors working together is the best. And that is to have, to be as far apart from one another as possible while the work is going on. We see each other every day for lunch and dinner and spend a lot of time together. But when we're working on something, we don't talk about it. We have between us a bursar, our editor, Margaret Ferguson, who over the years has learned to be a good bursar, a good moderator. If there are conflicts, she presents the questions on both sides, sometimes gets the answers. It all gets worked out. And so, at any rate, we decided, at Sarah's suggestion, that we would formulate 3 questions and ask them of each other. And the only question now is, who will start? Shall we?
It's up to you, my darling.
Oh, well then. I guess I will. Sarah, you speak beautifully. Many people remark on it. You have a kind of precision and clarity in your language, not to mention a wealth of language that is becoming a real rarity in our time. You're a great example to those of us who know you. And my question is, what is it, do you think, that has given you that clarity and ability to synthesize your thoughts so beautifully when you speak? Moving on. Is it poetry?
Abject fear of saying the wrong thing to my mother early on. And practicing elegant language so that she could not top me. She was, as David knows, brilliant, not smart. And she was a raging alcoholic. And she was very sure of herself, as raging alcoholics often are. And besides that, she was a Texan. And and so I practiced language to stand up to her, I think, as much as anything else. And and just as seriously, darling, I love language. I think that is the stuff. I think that's the guts in most writers. I mean, for me, words are the stuff I breathe. I just think about the way I speak, and I think about the way everyone else speaking to me is talking, and I write down a word I'm not certain of almost every day, and I study Latin every morning. That's my life. The word is my life, and that's my answer. Are you ready?
I just wanted to comment that
All right.
just about every Texan I've ever met has great storytelling abilities. I didn't know anything about Texas until I married Sarah, but I've been down there many, many times. And although I don't want to live down there,
Nor do I.
one of the amazing traditions that they have down there is storytelling around dinner. It seems like everybody can just take some incident, some banal thing that happened to them that day, and spin it into a tale that just has you just slapping your knees, and it's amazing. So it sounds, to me, I didn't never really thought about it, but you come from a culture of storytellers.
Are you
Okay.
quite finished?
I'm quite finished.
He's stalling there.
He doesn't want to answer my questions. They're going to be hard.
Okay.
I've
We
watched.
agreed you couldn't get me here,
No, I wouldn't do that.
nor are you.
I
No,
wouldn't do that
All right.
anyway.
I'm relaxed.
I've watched you fill dozens and dozens of sketchbooks over our almost 33 years together.
All right. I'm numbers dyslexic.
The very famous illustrator and creative genius to whom I'm married is not good with numbers. I've watched you fill dozens and dozens of sketchbooks over our almost 33 years together. What is it about a person or an object that compels you to draw him or her or it? What is it that makes you stop you stop the car. You turn around when we're eating dinner out, and he always has his sketchbook, and you start drawing when I'm in mid-sentence. What is it that compels you to draw, whatever that is?
You know, a lot of times it's, we might be sitting in a restaurant or sitting at a bar or something, and I'll see somebody with their face tilted on their hand in a certain way. I'm not interested in drawing portraits of people so much as I am attitudes, and I think what makes illustration interesting are those attitudes and those bodily gestures, that body language interests me a lot. I spent a lot of time in my youth trying to figure out what people were thinking just by the way they were sitting or the way they were, breathing. And so it's really the human figure that intrigues me. But I'm also really, really interested in environments too, because I think architecture is such an influence on who we are and how we behave and how we live. I think the fact is that most people don't even know that that's a wooden floor they're looking at. They don't think about it, or grass that they're walking on. It doesn't occur to them. And yet it's there and it's influencing them. And architecture is such a tremendous part of my dreams that I as much as I studied the figure, I studied perspective, and I think it's the key to everything in a good picture for me in my art. I'm not talking about everybody else's art. Some people can draw things just in flat perspective without any depth at all and make it fascinating. But for me, it's all about depth and depth of field and weight of line and gesture. And that's what I'm looking at. You know, I can find myself in a bus terminal or a dumpy bar or a nice bar or a nice hotel or a crappy hotel. It doesn't matter. I can find interest in the perspective and the people within it.
It's the same with me in words, overhearing something.
Yeah.
Oh, I think we should just ask one another 2 questions because I want Susan to be a part of this.
Yeah, me too.
Pick out your best ones.
Let's see. Oh, good. I've got 5 or 6 here. Let me choose one.
One more.
Well, you know, I didn't see the friend out on the table out there, so people can't buy it or look at it. So I'm not going to talk about that, although I did have a good question. No? Well, okay, I'll say that.
Maybe
Sarah,
that'll make them go to the library and get the friend.
there you go. Sarah wrote this book called The Friend that I did the pictures for. It was the hardest project I ever had in my life. First of all, because it was autobiographical on her part to an extent, and I knew all the backstory, and yet,
I don't know if that's,
thank you so much.
there's the spread you want to show.
Oh,
Yeah.
my goodness.
I think my statement is, I think the ending of this book is the most satisfying, most beautiful, most touching of all the resolutions in your books. And I've illustrated all the books she's written.
Thank you.
Yet it is such a basically sad book about a child who's completely left alone by
It
her
isn't
parents.
sad.
Well, to me, it is sad. Excuse me. Let me finish. At bottom, it is a sad situation.
You're right.
And at the end, it makes this sudden leap into the future where we get a glimpse of that lonely little girl, Belle, as a grown woman. And this woman was basically raised by a servant woman, a black woman, with a life and a family of her own apart from her work. And this little girl had no parental guidance whatsoever in the book, at any rate. And although I found this story the most difficult of all your texts to illustrate, I think it was those closing lines, which still choke me up when I read them, that convinced me more than anything else that I could do this story. And the question is, why did you give it that ending? Do you think it's true that a person other than the parent who's only there occasionally can give a child the strength to grow up, to mature, and to live a full life?
Absolutely, and without question, and I wouldn't be alive today without Ola Beatrice Smith, and there are other people in this room who have had exactly the same experience with someone else other than his or her mother or father. My mother was off at psychiatric units of major hospitals and the Hazelton Foundation, or she was in her bedroom. And when she wasn't drinking so much that she could stand up, she was playing bridge at the club or playing golf. I very seldom saw her. I don't remember ever having been hugged by her. And my father was a very busy man in Texas, and he was off hunting and fishing a lot. He was just away a lot. Ola Beatrice Smith spent every hour with me 6 days a week, and on Sundays, I more often than not went to church with her until I was 6 or so. She has influenced me with regard to my core values much more than my parents. In fact, as David knows, I left Texas deliberately, and I also took a 180-degree turn from my parents with regard to the way I live and we live. And I'm very proud of that.
You just taught
And
me
I still
something.
love my parents. I honor my parents and I respect them enormously, but I chose a life totally different from them, and I hurt my mother by making that choice. My father died young. He didn't know that I left Texas, and I became a writer. It just terrified him. Terrified my mother.
You just
Excuse
cleared
me.
something up for me. I mean, I've known this story about you and your family and this woman who was there, but I keep have to reminding myself, or you just reminded me, that it wasn't just an occasional thing. This was not a woman who worked for your parents once a week. She was
No.
there with you every day,
She lived in the back in a charming little
and she
tiny cottage.
and she really loved you, and it was a long-term thing.
Yes, her 3 girls were grown when
She wasn't giving you Ritalin to keep you calm in the times that she wasn't there, right?
David and I don't know about Susan. I know Susan's books, but not Susan. But we would have been filled with drugs in grammar school. In elementary school, they would have given us everything they could have. We have to move along because I want Susan to join us. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
How do you know when a work of art is finished? I do not understand why you stop when you do, and I've watched that process for a long, long time. I don't get it. I don't know what you're looking at that makes you stop.
I'm not looking at anything. I answer the phone, and my editor says, "David." September, your book was due last month. We don't have the luxury anymore that we used to have, even 20 years ago, us illustrators of sitting around and looking at something for a week and trying to figure out, if something is in exactly the right place. I mean, all of our companies have been bought up by places that sell tires and toothpaste, and everything has to be done on a schedule and almost an assembly line. And even though publishers try to accommodate you as much as possible, and most of them will take your book off the publishing list if you're going to be late, if it's going to be worth it to wait. You still have, things have speeded up in my lifetime as an illustrator to a tremendous amount, to a tremendous degree. It started 15, 20 years ago with the advent of the fax machine, when suddenly you didn't get I used to be an editorial artist, so I generally would get an assignment from the New Yorker on Monday, and then they would overnight the essay on Tuesday, or the video I was to look at to do the drawing for the actors in the movie I was doing the spot illustration for the review of, and then you could get your drawing in the overnight mail the next day. But then suddenly with the fax machine, you could get called at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Chris Curry would say, "David, can you work?" And I'd say, well, yes. I'd be in the middle of a book, so I'd drop everything. She would fax me the article by 11. She'd say, "Can you get it in the mail tonight?" And that's when you learn to really draw fast. That's when you learn to just rely on your, it kind of eliminates, you have to kind of clear away the self-doubts and just rely on the fact that they hired you, and that means, you must have something good about you. It's sort of like being at the Loft, you've got to assume you've got some talent, or they wouldn't have accepted you here in the program. Yeah. True or not,
Now.
All right.
All right, Susan, please.
I wonder if one of the questions that I jotted down on my clipboard links to that might be of special interest to sort of the writers and artists at all levels that we have out here with us today, is maybe if you could reflect a little on the significance of creating places and spaces for your creative work. And what kinds of things, I think we don't always give ourselves the kinds of permission to create the spaces we need, or we struggle with finding that sometimes it's space, sometimes it's time, sometimes it's mental space. And I just wondered if you have some reflection on that. It might link to what you were saying about how fast-paced the publishing world is, and you've done some things, the two of you, to create a life where the pace goes differently. And you've touched on it, but I wonder if you could reflect on that a little more.
I've been drawing pictures since I was 2 years old, and I started drawing on the floor of my parents' home, and I would just, I don't know the real reasons for it, but everybody starts drawing when they're 2 or makes a little squiggle on a piece of paper, but I kept doing it for some reason, and I think it's because I got a lot of praise for it from my mother, because this was the 50s and we didn't have TV, and mothers were desperate for their children to be self-occupied or to get out of the house and play all day and don't come back. And so my drawing was a way of pleasing my mom, for one thing, but it also was it became just a habit, and I loved doing it. And I even in my teenage years and during my first terrible marriage, I was able to bring down this bell jar around myself and draw in the midst of mayhem of infants and children playing around me, and I could just sit down at the dining room table and bring this area around me. And it was remembering that made me able to encourage kids in schools that we would visit, some children who were very definitely growing up in trailers with mayhem around them, that you don't need a room of your own, you just need to be able to create a room of your own wherever you are. And it might make you look weird, it might make you, but if you get into that focus and that mode that you have to get into to draw or to write, time disappears. You don't hear people saying, "David," you just don't hear it, and
Your eyes
and you
change.
appear
It's okay.
strange, but if you know what's necessary, that's where you go. You,
How about you, Sarah?
Sarah?
I agree with everything David just said, and we both are capable of doing that, and I know you are as well. And oddly enough, or in terms of just a little serendipity here, I have 5 rules for aspiring writers on the back of a little card I give out after we speak. And number 4 is something about go to wherever that place is in your home, wherever you live, and write every day. It's a variation on that. And the 5th one is if you don't have that place, then find that place within you and write anyway. And that's what David and I know how to do with his art making and my writing, is finding that place. My space on the 3rd floor of our home is no bigger than some fancy people's closets in which we've been allowed to step when people are showing off homes in various parts of the world. And it's really that size. And I love that space. And it's filled with books. And it looks out over my beloved river, the St. Joseph River. I can hear it. And I don't have any music or a clock or a telephone or anything else there. It's just silence and that tiny room and my books, and there I am. And nobody comes up there. I don't allow anybody to come up there. I guess I'd let you come in if you want to. But he's usually busy doing other things. You would never show a lack of respect by going in there when I'm not there.
What I'm valuing in how you talk about your space is something that I wonder if you have more reflection about, and that is how your own childhoods have been referenced and kind of threaded into your words this morning, including and to do with this part about creating space and the necessity of it, but how simple that requirement is at its core. I wonder if you have more thoughts about the link between our own childhoods and the work we do creating for young people.
May I please say something about my closet? First, I had a closet when I was young, and now I still have a closet, in a sense, in that space on the 3rd floor is tiny, tiny. It used to be a bedroom for the people who worked for this big family. This big French was a French aristocrat and his family of 8 children and his wife, and they lived in that tiny space. But I had a closet when I was a child, and my mother didn't know about it. I lived in a big house, and she wasn't curious like I am. I'm frighteningly curious. It's dangerous, but most writers are very curious. But she didn't know where that closet was. And I filled it with books that I got from the library, and Olaby took me to the library for the first time. And we would put books in there, and I would put a pillow in there when I thought about it, and I had my Bear Richard. But when I was 5, Richard went in there with me. And I had a disgusting blanket. Some people in the room carried around disgusting blankets, wanted to take them to school, and Mother wouldn't let them. There are those of us. Anyway, that was it. I just thought about that, Susan, that it was the same space with the same things in it. And darling, you still do the same thing. We've lived in Mexico for 17 years, with the exception of last year, and you made a space in the kitchen on a table when we first went there. It wasn't more than 2 feet by 3 feet on that table, and you just took the kitchen table and made that your studio.
And that's all you've got, you know. You make do with what you have.
Turning from real life, or maybe partway away from it for a second, David, when I was thinking about meeting with you today, I was remembering the first book of yours of which I became aware, and I wonder if there might be others in the group, that this was your first. David Small was Imogen's Antlers. And,
Here.
So
Hurrah!
your breakthrough book, I would Yes, right, authored and illustrated by you. And the thing that I'd love to hear you speak about at will here is I'm also struck by the similarities between Imogen and one of your most recent, and this is David's latest Caldecott winner, or Caldecott Honor winner, One Cool Friend. Both books are about children that live in some world that's between the real world and a fantasy world. And I just wondered if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about these books. So,
I'm trying to remember. Imogen's Antlers was a book that my then editor at Crown, whom I'd been following around from publisher to publisher, his name was Alan Benjamin, he had to browbeat that publisher to publish that book. They didn't want to have anything to do with it. They didn't understand it, and Alan made them publish it, and they did it, and they did a pretty good job. And then it got on Reading Rainbow, and I think today it's probably sold millions of copies in paperback. Doesn't mean I'm a millionaire. You only get 1 cent for a paperback copy, folks.
It's so great.
But a story of a little girl waking up with antlers on her head, that comes straight from Kafka. She woke up in this condition. Nobody understood her. Mother keeps fainting throughout the book. Kids love that part. Mother has ways of drawing attention to herself in all situations in this book. It's a story about a kid with differences, and kids with differences can't help that. I didn't realize this is an example of a book that I thought I had written that had absolutely no lesson attached to it. That's my goal, is to write a book that has no lesson, and I've found out over the course of 50 books that that's an impossibility. You cannot write a book, especially a kid's book, that has no lesson in it, because basically, whether you're aware of it or not, there will be one. That's why we tell each other stories to begin with. And I didn't realize what the deep lesson was until Sarah and I were at a school somewhere in Michigan, and this woman came out eagerly to meet me. She was the special ed teacher. I didn't even know what special ed was, but she was the woman with the class full of kids in wheelchairs and with special machines and special problems, and she said, "Yours is our favorite book. We read it almost every day." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, they understand. She's like a special ed kid. She's got this problem. It's not her fault. She can't do anything about it." Somebody also said the same thing about Ruby May Has Something to Say, which is about a woman who has a terrible speech problem. She's got a hideous speech impediment. I think it's the only kid's book that's ever been written, a comedy about a person who has a speech impediment. But she's got this urgent message of peace, universal peace and understanding that she wants to deliver to the world. And the only way she can talk is her nephew makes this hat for her out of old kitchen junk. And whenever it's on her head, she can speak beautifully. It's a colander with, things attached to it, a corkscrew on top. And when she's wearing this, it's like the magic feather in Dumbo, she can then speak clearly. And she has this meteoric political rise. She becomes governor of Texas. And
Texas.
we sent a copy to Ann Richards. She loved it. And then she goes to the United Nations. And at the very last moment, in front of all the leaders of the world, before she's about to give her peace and understanding message, her hat gets snatched by a pigeon hawk because it's covered with doves of peace at that point. And yeah, well, anyway, I guess I'm writing about kids with my own problems, and this Tony's book One Cool Friend is about a kid who's totally isolated and lives with his dad, who's totally isolated from him. And he steals a penguin out from the aquarium, takes it home in his backpack, and his dad isn't even aware that there's a penguin in the house. And that's the hook, and that's the development of the story. It has a surprise ending, which you mustn't reveal. Tony Buzzio. Tony's a librarian. It's a woman. She's a librarian up in Maine. Wonderful, wonderful story.
So have you talked about fantasy and how, I'm trying to think if something that I read that you said about that you had thought you might do quite a bit of work with fantasy in your illustrating career, and then there's been this interesting counterpoint with the books that you and Sarah have done together, which have a whole different, often a historical, realistic aspect.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Things didn't go the way I thought they were going to go, and I'm kind of glad because I've found through Sarah's work, through illustrating Sarah's work, I think I've found a different kind of artist in myself, a different kind of illustrator. I don't know what kind that is, but it's not. It has nothing to do with fantasy. It has to do with being. I think somebody at this conference recently pointed out something that I've always known was true. We've both always known was true, that there are two voices going on in our books, the books we've done together. There's Sarah's voice, which usually comes through the character of a young girl. There's a kind of optimism that sees them through whatever difficulty they're going through, and they're all going through some kind of terrible difficulty. And my job is to be the Detroit, you might call it a cynic, I would call it a realist, that I am, to show visually the situation that these children are combating. And in most cases, it's been a sort of a hideous urban environment.
Yeah, all three of these.
So, I don't know what that leaves us with. Leaves us with some books that are
It does.
equivocal.
It does. I wonder, why don't I ask Sarah one more question, and we'll throw it open for some audience questions. Sarah, one of the things about your work and career that interests me, and I think would others here too, is that when one writes picture books, there's only so much of your writing that gets out into the world. And it's, I don't know if dwarfed is quite the word, but it certainly, the amount of writing that you do in life is much more than what sees the light of day. And I think you've spoken sometimes a little bit about how you write to find out what you're thinking. And I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what that's like to have your published work be such a small part of this larger, really important work you're doing as a writer every week. What's that like?
Isn't that a good question?
Yeah.
That's a good question for everyone in here. Well, the first answer is that I don't write to be published, and so it doesn't matter to me how many words are in the world. I don't write to be published, and I actually don't write for children. And some people in the room who may have heard one of the speeches I give are aware of that. I think that the best picture books throughout history, we don't know whether the ones I wrote are among those or not yet. It's too early to know, but history will tell. I know I have a good chance because of my illustrator. But the books have words that are all over the world, as I said, and those words are few as Susan just emphasized. And it doesn't matter to me because I'm trying to reach not just a child, but someone else like myself. So I'm speaking to the other sensitive person. If nothing else, I'm high-strung and my antennae are too long. And so I'm speaking out to a boy of 5 or 6 or 7 who's in a difficult situation, and one of the books I've written lifts him up for one reason or another. Or I'm speaking to an 85-year-old grandmother or grandfather who's reading to a child, and for some reason those few words lift up this older person. That's the person to whom I'm writing. And every day, probably very much like others in this room, I write a lot. I write every day. Eudora Welty said, writing is a muscle. You have to exercise it. So I write a lot of poetry. Most of it is mediocre or worse. And I'm working on a series of essays right now about mistakes in the garden that are developing into philosophical essays. And I have some modern contemporary fables, which are appropriate for the picture book. But if I read them to David and he doesn't like them, they go in a drawer. So I write and I write and I write. It's a wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing questions from the audience. It's my job to repeat them on the microphone. So if you've got them, then I'll repeat and invite David and Sarah to answer. So let's. Okay.
So this question is for Sarah. When you just said that you write every day,
I do.
Is there a word limit that you're writing for? Is it just a scene or an emotion, or what is it that you're trying to accomplish every day? What is the goal?
It's embarrassingly stream of consciousness, and some days it's about my garden. I have a big garden. It's very important to me. Some days it's about the famous illustrator standing next to me. I've written a book about him in my diaries, but I don't think I could. I don't think I would want to have it published.
Thank you.
I adore him, and we have a very long and complicated marriage, and I would step in front of the bullet if it were coming at him. I think everybody who knows us also knows that. So I don't have a goal other than to write a lot. I guess when I say that, I mean it. So every day I know I write 400 or 500 words. I probably more often than not throw 400 or 500 words. I probably throw away 450 of those, especially if I'm writing a poem.
Great. Another question? Yes, sir.
Curiosity, do you make your living writing and picture books?
So the question is, do you make your living from writing and picture books?
And how do you get to that stage?
Then,
And what is the getting to that place? What does that involve?
yes, we do make our living that way.
And we're grateful.
And we're very lucky, I think. I started at a good time. I started making picture books back in the old days when we did color separations, and I was thankfully saved from having to do any more than 3 of those books because of the advent of digital publishing and so on, which made it all cheaper. But we did kind of come up during the bubble in the 80s and 90s when picture books sales were huge, and picture book children's publishing departments were supporting entire publishers from time to time, from year to year. So a lot of books were being published, too many books were being published, too much crap was out there, but I think that was good for us too, because it kind of, the cream separated, and we used to go on book tours regularly. That's kind of over now because publishers have cut way back. You don't go on book tour anymore unless you're Oprah Winfrey, or somebody like that. But
On little book tours, but
you can go
about
on,
3
yeah.
weeks.
But still, we're hanging on, and I'm still getting contracts.
And I'm still getting contracts, and
Yeah.
hanging on is a good
Yeah.
way to put it. In the beginning, we were also speaking in schools a lot, and we don't have to do that anymore.
Everybody I know who's coming up in the children's book world still goes to schools every spring, It's like, forget about your work. You've got to spend the 2 months on the road. You've got to be out during March, which is reading month. You've got to be good at it, too. Otherwise, the word of mouth isn't going to work. And by the way, that's still the way it works, as far as I know. It's not, what you put on Facebook. It's the performance you gave and how much it touched people. And
In the beginning, we also both taught. We're both ex-academics. I mean, it's been a long haul.
yeah, I thought I was going to be a teacher for the rest of my life. But
I
at
too.
the age of 38, my position was eliminated during the Reagan administration when all the schools were in trouble and they started cutting out programs in the arts and
Well,
philosophy
there
and
was a
religion
recession.
and all that stuff. And yeah, it wasn't Reagan's fault. It was a recession. It just happened to happen.
A long and
We like to
complicated
refer
marriage.
to it like as the Reagan recession, but anyway. So at 38, I really began my career. It was the same month of the San Francisco earthquake, and it was as if it had happened in our house. The floor heaved up. I had no income. We had no place to live because we lived in campus housing. We had no savings. I would have gone to New York in a shot, but we didn't have any money, so Sarah
I
went
was
to
adjunct
work.
faculty. I mean, it didn't matter. David's tenure track position was cut.
Yeah.
We lost our home and our insurance, and it was terrifying.
Yeah, and we lost our complacency, too.
Here, here. Yeah.
Another question from the audience? Yes.
I know a lot of writers say that a character will take their book in a different direction from what they thought. I'm wondering if the same is true for illustrators. Have you ever had a character develop in a way that's totally different from what you originally conceptualized?
So the
Yeah.
question is, have you had the experience of a character developing quite differently than the way you originally conceived it?
Were you there last night when I showed Glamour Puss? Oh, anybody here see that?
A lot of us.
It's a book I did just recently. It's a kid's book, but it's sort of a retelling of All About Eve, that Bette Davis film with animals. It's a rivalry between a cat, a very spoiled cat, and a Texan Chihuahua who arrives at the mansion in a purse and whose owner dresses it up in all sorts of wardrobes. When I read the original manuscript, I was really taken with the cat, and I knew I could really do well with a fat, spoiled cat because I own one, and I'm responsible for the spoiling. But I didn't really know what to do with the Chihuahua. I really dislike those little rat-like dogs. But the minute I had to draw that thing popping out of the purse, dressed in what is she wearing? She's got a bow on her head, and little gingham dress, and she's also very insecure, and she really actually hates her life. I mean, as the author put it, later line that she added later, she's trapped in a nightmare of fruit-covered turbans and hoop skirts, and that character became my focus, actually, to the point that I've now demanded, and I'm getting. Thank God, I'm going to do end papers with a whole Chihuahua wardrobe wallpaper. 20 different little costumes, and
So fun.
so it was totally unexpected. I thought it was going to be mainly about Glamour Puss, but it turned out to be mainly about Bluebell for me.
I I love this, if we stop and reflect for a minute, everyone, on the range of emotion in this and topic in this hour. Many of us have been to a lot of keynote talks at events that have had nothing resembling the range that we've gotten from these two today, from the Chihuahua to the questions that you asked each other that I never would have had the nerve to ask, so I'm so happy you did that. So this is, David and Sarah, I know from looking out, this is a quite extraordinary audience, and we've all been really honored to have two extraordinary people for our keynote this morning. So thank you so much.
Thank you.